I am the operations lead here at Women Talk Design, and I'm really excited for today's speaker stories. We have Dr. Christina Harrington joining us today, and we're gonna kind of pick her brain. And I'm very, very excited. She's one of the most impressive CVs I've ever seen. And I just want to, we have also from Women Talk Design, our CEO, Danielle Barnes, and she is going to be kind of helping out in the background for us a bit, just to kind of go over, to actually go over our the schedule today, just so you're aware. We will have a little time. I'm going to do the introduction, and then we'll chat with Christina, and then we'll have about 15 minutes at the end where you all will be able to kind of meet with each other. We'll have some breakout rooms for you all to kind of just get to know each other from our network, and just kind of mull over our conversation today. There will be time to also ask questions, so please feel free to put your questions in the chat. And I have some questions, but I will definitely have space for questions from you also. If anything comes up, please don't hesitate. Pop it in the chat. We'll be monitoring that, and we'll try to make sure we get all of your questions answered today. I am very, very excited, as I said, and I would like to introduce Dr. Christina Harrington. She is a designer and qualitative researcher who focuses on understanding and conceptualizing technology experiences that support health and wellness among older adults and individuals with disabilities. Her work combines her background in industrial systems and human factors psychology, focusing on areas of universal, accessible, and inclusive design. Christina is an assistant professor in the HCI Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, where she also has a courtesy appointment in the School of Design, and is the director of the Equity and Health Innovations Design Research Lab. Christina has spoken at academic conferences, nonprofits, and many other institutions. So please, if you would all join me in welcoming Dr. Christina Harrington. Little silent clap there, yay. Christina, thank you so much for joining us and being a part of this conversation, and really just letting us talk with you about your experiences. How are you doing today? Good morning.
Good. How are you? How is everyone?
I'm good.
This is really cool. And I'm low-key mad that my internet was so flaky, and I missed Sticky as the introduction.
Right. Right. You do a little Drake throughout the day, right? No worries at all. No worries. I'm glad you were able to make it. It's kind of the eye of the beast, right? With internet and being on Zoom and these virtual events. It's just something that we unfortunately have to deal with. It happens with everyone. So let's get started. I want to start off with, as a speaker, why do you speak? What is it that makes you want to speak and share your thoughts and ideas?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think part of the reason is visibility. And it ties into a lot of the research and the work that I do, the ability to be visible, and for marginalized groups, for folks who don't always have a voice. So the ability to have discourse at a level where we can have conversations that are sometimes tough, but we can amplify voices that are not always heard and that are typically neglected. So yeah, I think one of the reasons why I speak is, just creating and helping to create platforms that allow for that discourse, allow for us to hear voices and thoughts and perspectives that we don't always hear.
I love that. I love that you use the word discourse. Like, I love that thought of really trying to make sure that we're mixing things up and we're really allowing, those voices that we do not hear, which is something that I think especially for Women Talk Design, we're really trying to fight through and break that glass ceiling and make sure that we're amplifying those voices. You have such an extensive background in research, and obviously this is part of what you do and a huge part of your career. I'd love to know how your work that you do as a researcher impacts your speaking career.
Mm. I think it fuels it in
Yeah.
a way. Oftentimes, I think, especially in academia, it's like you do research and then you get invited to speak because people want to hear about the projects that you do. But I actually kind of look at it flipped. The more that I have these, because I hate, not hate, but I oftentimes look at opportunities to speak as an opportunity to have a conversation when people prompt different questions and when we can discuss different things. I look at that as an opportunity to um, um, to kind of come up with new topics that might, fuel my research.
Yeah, I like that. I get what you're saying. And I like that you flip it, that it's not,
Mhm.
the basic way. You really take it from a totally different side. Considering the work that you're doing right now, what subject do you feel is the most urgent that you want to speak on, that you're like, we've got to like make sure that we're really hammering this in and getting people to listen?
That's a great question. Um, that would have to be, hmm. I mean, I'm always gonna float back to the way we think about equity and design and how expansive that is. Um, how we express that, right? I'm always gonna float back to, there need to be more opportunities for Black and Brown folks to see themselves in design, and to see themselves in the future of design, and in the future of the world around us. I actually saw this meme yesterday that was like, there are certain subgroups of people that get so upset about Black and Brown people seeing themselves in hypothetical futures, right? Because we see it with sci-fi TV, we see it with
Yeah.
literature, we see it with media, that we're still having to fight to see ourselves in worlds that don't even exist yet. Imagine how we feel having to scrap for visibility in the world that does exist. So
Yeah.
that's always going to be a topic that I'm gonna, want to champion for. And I think design kind of has the ability and the responsibility to do that. It's just, does design take up that call, or do we kind of, because we still have subsets of, organizations, companies, groups that want to position design as being apolitical, or design, doesn't have a side in certain things, but it does because everything is by design. Jackson, Mississippi not having water right now is by design because there are affluent neighborhoods, there are affluent cities in these states that would never have these problems. The flooding that continues to happen in certain wards in Louisiana, and certain areas of Houston, that is by design. We've put poor Black and Brown folks in those neighborhoods because that's where they can afford. And then we kind of don't care what happens to them as we go through this very real climate change that's happening. So I'm always going to, as I'm doing right now, go on rants about what equity in design needs to look like.
Yeah. Oof, yeah, it's powerful. And there's so much like just truth in what you're saying that doesn't just, not just specifically like social, but just in every part. I'm like, as you're like talking about that these things are happening due to design, I'm like flooded with all these list of things that I just see that I'm like, yes, like this is the issue. It's the root of the issue, right? It's the root of the issue. And I read a couple of your articles, and just even just seeing like you really focus on the fact that the I look at it as the root of the problem, as far as like really looking at how we design, right? Not necessary, and how we come up with the design before we even like start to design it for certain people. I think that's just a great perspective. And as you take that experience and that passion, and even like just all of the knowledge that you have, how do you use that? And how do you, these are powerful things. And like you said, I am notorious for getting on my soapbox and going on a rant for things. And so, but when you're giving talks and when you're really trying to drive home those points, what's your process of developing and practicing that talk? What's your process of taking that information and getting it to a point that it is, for lack of a better word, digestible for the audience, so that they are actually taking it in and
Mhm.
really like being, challenged to move?
I think in part it's like who you're having these conversations with.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things someone introduced me to this term, I think like 2 years ago at the height of the uprisings in 2020, um, that I am a community engaged scholar.
Mm.
And so a lot of the times my first go-to is not to have, you know, of course, I do speaking engagements at other universities and for conferences and things like that. But I actually, jump at the opportunities to do speaking engagements and talk to folks outside of those institutions, because I think that that's where a lot of the real work happens. And a lot of, you'll hear where your ideas are BS, for lack of a better word, because when we have them internally constantly, right, we're regurgitating the same information to each other, even within the design world, even with people coming from so many different backgrounds and like academic levels. And, we have folks that do design that, just picked it up because they have a really dope skill set. We have folks that went to 4, 8+ years of school for design. But even within those groups, when we talk about design, we know these things because we work in design. We've seen the blogs on Medium, or we've read the academic articles, and we're talking about design research. But when we step outside of those and we have those conversations, that's when people will push back and be like, hey, that's actually not even how it works in the real world. Because we can think hypothetically and theoretically about design in a studio all day long, right? We can sketch, we can put stuff on a computer, we can test things, we can model things, we can play around with things. But it's not until you talk to folks about how does this thing actually impact my day-to-day life, outside of the confounds of your laboratory or your studio or your whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's for me where I get the most learning, right? Even as, it's still weird to me when people say doctor and PhD and all those things. But even as somebody who's gone through that much schooling, I still learn so much from folks that sit outside of the walls of organizations and institutions and formal like industry and company, because they will give you the most real, honest, and brutal feedback and opinions on what you're saying. So, if we're talking about how, yeah, I actually had a conversation with someone the other day when we were talking about in academia, we use community a lot to talk about, doing research with people that are on the ground that are, most impacted by things. And they were like, when you all talk about community, you never use community to talk about white, rich, affluent people, and they are a community. You always use community has almost become like this derogatory term. So how do we only learn that when we're in conversation with folks who are outside of what we do. So yeah, I think just having those conversations is what has shaped my my speaking ability and the things that I talk about the most.
Yeah, I love the perspective of continually learning, right?
Mhm.
I mean, your education, your background, your experience, your knowledge is so impressive that I look and I go, well, I can only learn, right?
Mhm.
But to know, to have someone like you go, yeah, I have all this knowledge, but there's still so much more that I can learn. You still have this massive openness to learn, and you use it with your talks in, even in your research of like, instead of just being like, well, I know what I'm doing and putting it together, you're in these conversations learning more and using that and applying it to putting together a talk to talk about these really important subjects. And yeah, it's really admirable. I think it's something that we don't often think about, the fact that continually learning is also going to be what helps us to put those talks together, having just continually gaining that knowledge. You're a professor, and as a professor, you're teaching regularly, right? So you're kind of on the constantly in front of people talking and teaching, and it's a little bit of a different setup compared to a conference and things like that. So when you're speaking at events and conferences, how do you use your experience as a professor when you're giving your talks to larger audiences? Like, what changes in how you approach when you're speaking to those groups?
I mean, I think on a basic surface level, there's like making sure that you leave time for people to digest and comprehend things, right? You can do that through slide design and like visually how you talk about what you're talking about, but also just like pace.
Mm,
Um, if you've ever given a talk anywhere, you're typically told you have 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, whatever. The academic mind says, let me cram as much as I can, because
right.
it's really hard to talk about the scope of a project or the breadth of an entire body of work in those periods of time sometimes. Um, but oftentimes what I've learned in my classroom that I bring into these speaking engagements is like, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna do like 10, 15 minutes and then I'm gonna stop. And I'm gonna be like, who has questions, or just to try to get engagement. I think it's also maybe my personality type. I don't particularly like these types of talks I love, but you don't get to do these often.
Right.
Oftentimes they're like prepare slides, get up there and go.
Right.
And my social anxiety is like, I don't want to talk for 45 minutes straight.
Mhm.
And now it's also a little draining.
Mhm.
So what are the ways that I can get folks to engage? And I think it kind of coincides with the nature of design. At least my approach to design is like design as a participatory or a collaborative, thing. So, I don't want to talk at people. I want us to, learn from each other. And if there are things that you're not understanding, I don't want you to wait until 45 minutes is over. Let's talk about it after 10 or 15. Let's talk about it after 30. So I think that that's one of the biggest things that I've learned in the classroom. And I think students do better in that regard. It also requires them to stay awake because if you're checking in every 10 to 15 minutes
Yeah,
during a lecture, they don't have a large window to really get that room.
absolutely. I was just talking to someone about a professor that would lecture for like 3 hours straight.
Mhm.
And I was just like, it was rough. So absolutely, like keeping the audience engaged. I love that, I'm one of those people that wants to just jam all the information I have in, and because I'm like, well, you need to know all of it. You need to know everything. But having that understanding of letting people process and digest, and gain and giving them a breath in between is really, I love that. And I love that you're able to take that, what you do for your students, and also translate it into your speaking engagements. um it's really helpful. I so you speak as a professor in classrooms and things, but you've also spoken for nonprofits and different conferences and things. What is the difference? What do you see in the differences in those different venues? Like, um, how do those experiences compare? What's your preference?
I love giving talks so my research falls into like these two areas of looking at technologies to support healthy aging among primarily Black older adults. And then like this Afrofuturism speculative design, how do we think about the future of the world? How do we think about the future of tech? How do we think about the future of design? I love giving talks to like churches
Mm,
or senior groups about the the benefits and the values of technology to support their everyday life. Um, because it's gonna humble you. Um, I don't care. A whole professor at Carnegie Mellon, and every single time I give the talk, they're like, "Oh, we're just here to help you with your little assignment," because they think I'm still a student. So the level of like, Black elders humbling you is always my favorite. Um, B, it gives a real world application of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
You can kind of see how folks will take some of that knowledge and be like, oh, I didn't know my phone could do that. I didn't know I could, you know, tell Alexa to remind me about my doctor's appointment. And
Mm,
now you have someone that's using a useful tool or a resource, and actually feeling like things are a little bit easier.
yeah.
But also asking you questions again, as we talked about earlier, that cause you to think like, oh, okay, we might want to look at this area, because so many people are talking about the frustration that they have with voice assistants not picking up their voice, right? Which is some of the work that I'm doing right now. That actually came from, giving talks or doing lunch and learns, where people are like, hey, I would love to use this, but if I ask Google Home, about i- something related to me, it doesn't recognize it. So I think that those are my favorite to do. I also just really love doing work with Black elders. So anytime I have the opportunity to go back and give a talk or share information that we've learned from a study, or whatever, I love that. And to the second part of your question, how are they different? Um, I mean, of course, there's like the purpose of why folks are
Yeah.
there. I think in a conference setting, in an academic setting, in a symposium or a summit, people are there to exchange knowledge. And so sometimes you might present something and somebody can, pose a different viewpoint or perspective, or tell you about a component of it that you weren't aware of. Um, and so it's like we're both, the goal at least is that we're both learning in that way, as opposed to giving a talk to a nonprofit or a community organization. They're really just there to like soak up and see how they can actually use it. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. You have a group that is exchanging knowledge, and then a group that's just trying to gain knowledge. And I
Mhm.
love that difference in being able to kind of work in both elements. I'm going to ask one more question. I have a couple others, but I would love for people to start popping in any questions that they have in the chat. We'll start opening it up to others in the group that may have some questions for Christina. But my next question, with all of the public speaking that you've been doing, how has that public speaking had an impact on your career? Do you have any future public speaking goals? Is there like a place or a group of people that you'd love to have their ear and really, you know?
um I think it's been a springboard. It's been a really dope springboard. I still sometimes get really floored and what's the word, I guess just like honored when I get a new invitation to speak somewhere. Like even when you all reached out and I was like, yeah, I want to hear what I have to say. I'm still like at that level.
Yeah.
Um, but every time I do one of these, it, allows me to reach a different audience.
Hmm.
And that provides different opportunities, whether it be for collaboration. I'll have people follow up in email, or they just want to ask questions. And we've been able to share out like different papers that I've written, or different blogs, or even like, I'm currently a part of this team working on the Building Utopia toolkit, and you'll have people that reach out and like, hey, how can I get, they're curious about things like that. Um, I would love to do a TED talk one day, but
Yes.
as I said, I think that that's like a huge, like, getting over that social anxiety hurdle of
Mm,
like, um, the beauty is that a bulk of speaking opportunities have come over like the last 2, 3 years, where it's like I can do a virtual talk in England, I can do a virtual talk in Taiwan or whatever, and you're not on stage, that takes away a lot of the
Yeah,
nervousness for me. To
yeah.
do a TED Talk, I think I'd have to kind of get over that fear of standing in front of people. Well, it's like, what do you do with your hands? Like right now, I don't see my hands, they're under the desk and they're fidgeting. But when you're in person and you're on stage and you're having to like engage with the crowd in a particular way, what do you do with your body? Like all of those things are things that you have to kind of think about. So I would love to do that one day. We'll see.
Yeah, no,
um,
it's gonna happen. We're gonna speak it into existence. That is
yeah,
awesome. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
You've mentioned social anxiety a couple times when it comes to public speaking. And you've kind of said that you're kind of in the process, you're still working on that. Do you have some tricks of the trade that you have used to kind of help you get over that, especially when you're speaking in symposiums and in academia? What is there things that you do that help you to kind of calm those nerves and walk out there with confidence?
Sometimes I actually remember what I tell my students. I can tell my
Mm,
students to do things all day. And then
right,
sometimes I remind myself of them that you are the expert of whatever you're giving the talk on, and no one knows it like you do. Even
mm,
if they are expert in that field, they don't know your talk. So if you fumble, if you miss a sentence, if you mess up, if you're working with a script and you mess up, no one knows. Keep going.
right,
And then I also tend to make like introductory jokes. I'll try to, to just loosen myself up and to get people acclimated with me. I don't think talks have to be so serious. Like, I'm not a physicist or a mathematician. We're talking about design. We're talking about people. People are
mm,
personable. People are varied. People are dynamic. So the ability to kind of just relate, finding ways to relate to people that you're talking about, and even in the times I have given in-person talks, especially with like Black elders groups, sometimes the positioning, right? I don't always have to be standing up over you. Sometimes we
mm.
can sit down. We can be in a circle and talk like, we're peers. And I think that makes me feel comfortable and it makes people feel comfortable. So just finding different ways to engage depending on the room and the crowd that you're speaking to.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Um, so I have a question from Danielle, actually. So you mentioned you like the approach talks as conversations and have it inform your work. I'd love to hear more about what this looks like in practice. Is it mostly through the questions you get or people who follow up with you afterwards? How do those presentations inform your work?
Yeah, so one example would be giving a talk I gave a talk at a church in Chicago maybe 2 or 3 years ago, just about like some of the research I was doing. And one of the organizers of that talk who worked with the elders group at the church reached out afterwards saying, one of the things that a lot of our elders are really having a problem with is X, Y, and Z.
Mm,
Is that something that you know about? And I'm like, oh yeah, we could, certainly collaborate to do kind of like technology drop-ins where people come in and learn about their phone and learn about like the basic operations of their computer. But it also kind of caused us in my lab to think, there really is this gap between the emergence of a lot of these systems and how people are being trained or being introduced to these systems. So then we have a research project that we're working on, and we're trying to figure out, how to make things work, and trying to, study this. But we're also doing this in collaboration with the organizational leaders of that senior group at the church, because they can directly benefit. This is one of those instances where the research can become more practical before it's just like a publication, a paper, journal article somewhere that people don't really get to see.
mm.
And I tend to try to go towards those types of projects. So, Danielle, to answer your question, when we think about like when I do these talks and folks come up to me after, I don't just take the questions and write them down. I actually am like, hey, let's set up a time and let's chat. And if there is a plausible like collaboration that can form from it, or even if folks are like, hey, like we would love to know more about this, and my lab can do a study and bring it directly back to them. That's the type of work that I love doing.
Love that. It's awesome. Um, yeah, that's really good. Thank you. And folks, please, we have a couple more minutes and then we'll do our breakout rooms. But I'd love if anyone else has any other questions, please don't hesitate. If you don't want to type it out, I'm one of those people that doesn't like to type things out. You can raise your hand and we'll call on you. But I do have a question from Carlene. Says, I used to work at a mental health research clinic in Washington Heights and would love to continue this community-centered work as I transition into UX design research. Do you have any tips on best practices for not becoming white saviors so that we can design for community needs and not what we assume are their needs?
Yeah, and I know that this is like really blunt, but just like listening to people. I oftentimes I get like really uh caught like, off guard, like not caught off guard, but I'm really taken aback sometimes when I see different industry or different design groups approach to doing community centered work that does everything but just listen to people.
Mm,
Um, a lot of times, people have already been working towards the things that you're trying to do, and they might have tried A, B, and C, and you might save yourself some time and the folks' frustration working with you by starting at D because that's where they are.
yeah.
Um, a lot of the times they know the things that they don't want to see in their neighborhoods or in their, community centers or in their churches. And I think that designers have to kind of drop our arrogance a little bit to think that we know best, because what we actually know is we know design tools, we know design approaches, and we know design methods. Very rarely are we the utmost expert of the design subject matter that we're working on, because people have lived this far longer than you've been working on this project, oftentimes far longer than you've been working at this organization. And I think a lot of companies are starting to think in that way. I know Microsoft is, Google is. There are a lot of big tech companies that are now trying to do community-based participatory design, community-based participatory research. And Carlin, they're probably looking for folks like you who want to come in and to really amplify this method. And you bring yourself a really big check to tell these big tech companies to just listen, because for whatever reason, oftentimes folks aren't, that's just not where they are. They're like, okay, well, we could bring in this expert from this field, and then we have this method and we have these tools and da 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 da. It's like, okay, where in the timeline have you scheduled to just have a listening session, to sit down and talk to people, to go out into the field outside of your cubicle, out from underneath your laptop, and to actually talk to folks, and learn from folks. I always, it is my personal, mentality that, everyone is the expert of their own lived experience. I can't tell you what you need. I can't tell you what works better. I can only, tell you my expertise in doing research or, designing things or whatever. And if you tell me that you need a tool that does this, it is my job to try my best to, figure out ways to, even if we're doing co-design, to develop a tool that does this. But I think, yeah, I think listening is just kind of the
Yeah.
biggest, most basic thing.
Yes, it's so true. It's the biggest and most basic thing, and also the most disregarded and forgotten thing, right? And
Mhm.
I think that's really powerful. We have another question from Tanisha. She says, as someone who is in clinical research, I am still struggling to make my voice heard in sharing my ideas. How do you ensure that your ideas are heard and valued when you work in research? It definitely makes sense, Tanisha.
Yeah, I would say find different venues, right? Um, Clinical research, I don't know if you're in academia or in medicine, but oftentimes we have like those handful of conferences that everybody in the field goes to every year. But there are so many different places where you can publish, where you can present. There are community design specific orgs. I think it's like uh, there is an org that's literally called like the community design, and they have community design something. But they have like they have a symposium every year where they allow people, like, they invite people to do panels and to do talks. Allied Media Conference has people come in from all over, academic organizers, activists, health practitioners, social work, anything you can imagine. Allied Media Conference is a place where, and they'll invite people to come do session tracks or to do workshops. Doing a workshop is a way to get your, as we talked about earlier, get your work out there in a more digestible format where people can engage and it doesn't feel like they're just sitting there and being talked to. I would just encourage you to look at all of the different venues and platforms where you can share out the work that you're doing.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you. There is a follow-up to Carlin's question. Says, how do you, and this is from Erica, how do you bring participatory design into your work? Couldn't agree more about the primary goal is listening to people, but how do you bring people into the design process more?
Yeah, that's a really great question. They've all been great questions, but that's a really great question. I've always thought that the first step is helping people to understand what design is, and that in most instances, most people have already been doing some form of design in their lifetime. Because I personally believe that design is a skill that is inherent to everyone, particularly Black and Brown and Indigenous and like people of color, right? We've been creating worlds for ourselves since we were brought to this country, or since our existence, because we've had to. So when you take the scary elitism away from design, because people who might not have gone to school for design, or they're like, oh well, I gotta take this class, I gotta take this boot camp, I gotta take this program, I gotta get this graduate degree in order to call myself a designer. And it's like, no, you don't. You can go to, I know in like different cities they have like local woodworking shops, and you can learn like in a couple of classes how to build things out of wood, metal, different materials. You can sit down and you can teach yourself how to visually create a flyer and think about the design and all of these things. Or you can think about the fact that there are probably areas of your home that you've changed to fit your particular needs. Something might have been too tall in the kitchen, or something in the bathroom didn't work for you, and you've rigged something up. You've created what we call a workaround, so that it fits your lifestyle. And in that, you've been a designer. You've done design. And so I think that that's one of the first steps, is always like reminding people or exposing people to the fact that design is not something that can only be taught, in an academic program. Design is something that we all do, sometimes on our day-to-day living. And so once you kind of take that away, because I've literally heard people say, like, my brain doesn't think like that, or I didn't go to school for that, or I didn't go to school at all. Once you kind of ease that, I think people are way more comfortable in like sharing ideas, because that's design, right? If we say, here's a problem, how do we solve it? And people start brainstorming ideas, right? And that takes nothing but just thinking, just throwing things out there, putting things on paper. People become way more comfortable engaging with different materials to represent those ideas, whether it be, I'm going to write it out on a sticky note, I'm going to sketch it out on a piece of white paper, I'm gonna take, different arts and crafts materials and kind of create a collage, or, 3D something. Like, you can work people up to doing various levels of you know, design representation or design conceptualization, but just allowing them to know that you have that in you already.
Yeah, thank you. That is it's really powerful. I appreciate that perspective. I we still have we can have a we'll have like one more question if anyone wants to pop in a question. If not, I have one more question that I will ask. And then we'll go ahead and we'll do our breakout rooms. And Christina, I just want to say thank you. I could literally talk to you for hours, honestly. Like you have so much knowledge and just a great perspective that I've learned a lot just in this little bit of time that we've had. So my last question I'll say is, what advice would you give to a new speaker, someone that's just starting out and, there's a lot of nerves and things like that? What advice would you give them? And following up with that question is kind of a two-part question. What's the best or worst advice you were ever given when it comes to public speaking?
Mm, um, so my advice would be find something that you're really passionate about.
Mhm.
One of the things that I've told several friends and just people in general about why I've grown to love public speaking is because it feels like I'm talking the same stuff I talk to my friends. It's just now I have a platform, or in some instances, you get paid to do it. It's like I've been saying the same stuff for years, and now people want to listen, and sometimes they want to pay me, and that's dope. So I would say find something that you're really passionate about, and mostly knowledgeable about. You want to make sure you never get up there and you're just saying things that are all over the place incorrect, but um, the more you love it, the more it speaks to your soul, or and just what you you know think makes this world better, the easier it is to give a talk about it. Because tying into the second part of your question, one of the best advice I got was to like lose the scripts.
Yeah.
And it's something that I tell my students, because God forbid you go somewhere where you can't get presenter view to work, so you can't see your notes,
Mhm.
or God forbid you miss a word or you skip a slide, you throw yourself off because you
Mhm.
don't know where to go next.
Mhm.
If you lose the scripts, and if you're passionate about it, you don't even need a script. Because sometimes I'm just ranting. Like sometimes I'm just like, I'm just talking. And if, if people are nodding, I'm like, oh, okay, they get it. If people are blank stare quiet, I'm like, let me shut up. Um, but I think the more you love that topic and that subject matter, the easier all of that is. And
Mhm.
you can always create, little note cards that have things that like the must hits, like the things that you like, I absolutely want to make sure I hit this or cover this. Especially if you're doing something, I think a couple people mentioned like clinical research, and you're like, I want to make sure I mention this citation or this website, go look here or whatever. But for the most part, you don't need a word by word script. It's only going to make you nervous. It's only going to your attention away from being able to see the people that you're actually talking to and their reaction, and if it works or not. So yeah, I think that those would be.
Yeah, I love to throw away the script. And I think like even just hearing you say like if you're attached to that script, it gives you those nerves and you aren't like really kind of listening to the audience, right? And reading the audience and understanding like, are they understanding? Are they not? And when you don't have that script, you're able to be more attentive to them and pick up on, read the room, if you will. Right? I love that. I think that's great. Christina, I had a wonderful time talking to you. This was awesome. It was really, really, really cool. Thank you to everyone that was asking questions and for all of you coming and chatting with us. We are going to do breakout rooms, and this is just a time just to kind of meet some new people. We have some suggested questions that are in the chat, and we'll put you all in breakout rooms and just, meet each other, say hello. But thank you so much for coming and being a part of this. And Christina, I'm looking forward to your TED Talk. It's going to be awesome.
Speaking at
Thank
your
you so
birthday.
much.